All right, hello again. So this is a video on Andrew Hairston's Mindscape, and I did a video on this a few days ago, and it like ended up like 45 minutes. I was probably gonna end up like going an hour and a half. It was ridiculous. I'm not gonna get in this video. I'm gonna try to make this like 15 minutes max if I can. And I just want to point out that like I'm not going to spend a long time interpreting the story itself. I think it speaks for itself, and I think you guys did a good job of seeing what value it has, and that when we look at it from the perspective, what I'm hoping is presenting you this as a story for you to think about science, magic, religion, that you're thinking about the way in which it interprets the idea of science and magic religion. It presents a world to you that is so odd, unusual, and causes you to think about how science and magic religion just really inform our basic interpretation of the world in which we live in. And I feel like that's what when Okafor was in her TED Talk was talking about how science fiction is really political writing because it presents the idea of what if, right? It says, if we had the ability to provide this to these people, what would they do? What would be the outcome? How would structures change? So, like, what are the knock-on effects of having the ability to do this, right? It's the whole idea that if what but basically the idea is that governments, if you think about it economically, are meant to distribute. They're meant to distribute, right? That's what they are. The ways in which all, like, basically goods, or we could say like wealth, the way wealth is distributed is through governance, right? That's what their job is supposed to be. And so they are the forms by which political speech takes place. So the idea of having science fiction as political speech, this idea that it's prompting sort of like policy, right? So here's a world that could exist. What's the possibility of making that world exist, right? What's that's the idea of what if coming through there. And we really get this in the Harrison story, so I'm not going to belabor it too much. But the reason I bring this up is because of the way it's introduced. Before we get there, though, I just want to make a point about the reading itself, like the specific reasons why I provided the text to you the way I did, right? So let's take a quick look at the text. One thing that I wanted you to notice is I gave you like the cover, the title page, all the copyright information, and then the actual book's epigram here by Gerald Vizenor, who's an author I would really recommend if you like the story here. He's way more in the indigenous realm, but his story, particularly his book Dead Voices, is awesome. If you're into indigenous literature, it's one of those ones that like really changes your whole perspective on the world. Anyway, in this case, we have like a quasi pseudo, whatever you want to call it, haiku with the moon. My young father comes to mind, walking the clouds. Obviously, the title of this edited text is Walking the Clouds. That idea is, when you think about this, Joe Vizenor is also a well-known indigenous author of the slipstream genre, which is a genre that really became popular in the 1980s because of sort of one reason. The rise of Native American literature during the 1980s was massive, huge, mainly through the works of like Louise Erdrich and her series that follows groups on Turtle Mountain Chippewa Reservation that sort of straddles the North Dakota and Minnesota. Awesome series of books. I really recommend them. But there a lot of Native American authors really came to prominence in the 1980s, and some of it led to the slipstream genre, which is the idea that suddenly sci-fi, there wasn't like hard sci-fi and soft sci-fi or whatever. it presented this idea that sci-fi could incorporate basically every genre, mainly the interpretation of the worlds in which the sci-fi could take place. Well, it became more common to allow magic to become like basically fantasy aspects to become more prominent in sci-fi. And Gerald Vizenor is a great example of that. But a lot of native texts are a great example of that because of their incorporation of their own native cultural worldviews, presented what we would perceive as magic into the scientific realm. Because, I mean, indigenous magic is really just science that we don't understand. And I hate to say it that way, but that's the truth of it. So, yeah, it's really just science that we refuse to believe as science. It's magic to Euro Americans, or to the dominant narrative. It's magic. Let's take a look. But we have Walking the Clouds here. We have this whole idea of bringing in this new view of, and when we're thinking about it, we're looking to a place that is unusual and obscure and changes, and it's a place where everything is coming together, really, when we think about what Vizenor is saying there. And then I provided you with the whole, I mean, obviously the chapter, and the chapter has an epigram of its own. And I really don't want to get too far into this, but this epigram is awesome. One reason, it's Vine Deloria Jr. and God is Red, another awesome text that I really recommend you read if you're into this at all. But it's important that, I was really surprised that no one actually mentioned the epigram, or this epigram particularly, in their response, because it presents what Hairston is really running up against. So if we just go through it, Vine Deloria Jr. is saying the imminent and expected destruction of this life cycle of the world ecology can be prevented by a radical shift in outlook from our present naive conception of this world as a testing ground of abstract morality to a more mature view of the universe as a comprehensive matrix of life forms. So basically, what he's saying here is that if we stopped, and he's talking to kind of a specific group, abstract morality, if we just stopped believing that this world was meant to be a test from God to develop the amount of righteousness necessary to enter heaven, and started acting like we lived in a world that was shared, and it was not something that we were supposed to like dominate and overcome for a next world, that this world itself was the world in which we have a universe of as a comprehensive matrix of life forms, that we're just one of the life forms living among many different life forms that we do not understand, but we should respect and appreciate and give space to in order to live its life as much as ours. If you connect that to what Harrison Sorey is saying, it's basically, yeah, at any point we have this, she has this barrier come down from space that sort of separates all life in a whole new way, a whole new matrix, and you have to learn to live with it in this whole new way. And because of that, the power structures totally shift. This quote's perfect because it's basically saying we have a radical shift in outlook. And she's saying, oh, you want a radical shift in outlook? What if I just dropped an alien barrier on the world that just also presented this horrible fever that no one could survive unless we relied on new forms of science? Ethnopharmacology, right? She presents to us these vermitlers from Burkina Faso, right? For some reason, every time I try to think of the capital, Ouagadougou, it's new Ouagadougou, and when I hear it pronounced, it has that gua at the beginning of it, but it looks like Ouagadougou. But it's Burkina Faso, right? It's this place that notoriously taken over by the French and the British in the 19th century. Horrific warfare to some extent, but really just Burkina Faso is really like one of those places that it's a colonial icon, you might say. It's not necessarily as bad as a place like obviously Rhodesia that doesn't exist anymore. Um, you know, places that have been horrifically taken by European and American settlers, but usually European settlers. But Burkina Faso is a great example of a colony that has just been completely dominated by European thinking, particularly the French. And here we have this group of the Vermitlers, these healers, coming to prominence, having an ability to harmonize with the barrier, to open it up. So they have this, suddenly there is this really strong ethnic ability to have what looks like in Hairston's story, a scientific impact, right? They're developing medicines that actually heal people. They have the ability to actually reshape reality, meaning transform the barrier and open it. And so these groups or this country and this place that has, in our reality, is essentially consigned to the backwater of civilization. And I don't know if before the story you guys even thought about Burkina Faso. And if even today you're thinking, oh, why is he talking about Burkina Faso? Well, maybe because that's where some of the story takes place. In this case, so this is significant in the fact that Hairston presents us with a complete perspective shift and saying, hey, all these people who never think about Burkina Faso start thinking about Burkina Faso, right? Because one day it could be important, right? And this goes back to the idea. We live in a universe that is a comprehensive matrix of life forms, right? There is not one form that is more significant than another. And that goes with humans too, right? That's what Vine Deloria is saying here. We're all the same. And so if we get down into really, and I hope you spent some time reading this introduction, because I'm going to make you pay attention to it right now if you decide to watch this video. One of the reasons that I had you read this specific edited edition is this intro is so important to what I want you to think about. And that's why I hope you read it. And that's why I want to point it out. If we go down to the bottom of this, it talks about the Hairston's really her concept of sci-fi. Of all three works, Mindscape provides the strongest invective on the sometimes unconscious imperialisms hidden in forms of Western science, right? On the one hand, it addresses the 19th century pseudoscience of polygenesis, whose critics, including W.E. Du Bois and Charles Eastman, you can say Du Bois if you want to, and Charles Eastman, who's a Santee Sioux, decried in its placement of Native and African peoples on the barbaric end of the genetic measuring stick of civilizations, right? And that's when we see, again, looking at the Vermitlers, the healers from New Ouagadougou, and then the Ghost Dance group. And the Ghost Dance group had a huge impact on the mid-19th century Native American prophetic movements that rose because of the annihilation that was going on of particularly the North American tribes who lived in the area that we call the United States, particularly when the West was considered opening, during the whole Manifest Destiny phase, the sort of the antebellum, the pre-Civil War, let's move everybody into, bloody Kansas stuff. That's the time then when, you had the Trail of Tears going on, and Trails of Tears, I should say, because basically the Cherokee weren't the only ones who were being forced off their land in North Carolina. They were joined by many other tribes and forced into Indian country, which is today Oklahoma. But this is what Hairston wants to bring to bear here, right? Is that the ghost dancers, they rise back up because they realize there is a gap. There's with this new barrier coming down, they have a new political power because the political structures that destroyed their tribes, in this case the ghost dancers were part of the Paiute Nation, that they and they came to prominence because there was such horrendous death and destruction going on. The ghost dancers, they danced and sang songs hoping to bring back the dead, also hoping to force the murderers, and I'm going to call them murderers, I hope you don't mind, um, who had who had come from Europe, and who settled the land, to go back. They wanted them to go back to Europe. That was one reason why they danced. And so if you see this, you see Hairston bringing these ghost dancers back, from the from history, and saying, look, these people are still around and they still have this historical memory, and their generational trauma is still real, and they're going to dance again. And their dancing, isn't is it their dancing and singing is another form of reality. It's another form that they say, oh, look, the barrier came. It provided us with what we desired, a total new formation of the power structure that had annihilated us. And so this is a significant look that Hairston's providing us. And if we keep going, on the other hand, the novel tackles a contemporary tendency, and this is really, really why I chose it: the eulogizing of Africa, proclaiming her demise, mourning the impossibility of any sort of African survival. That's, I don't know how often you hear, particularly people in power, but just people around you, when people talk about Africa, as a continent, they don't talk about it as a continent. But the idea generally when people are thinking about places like, Zambia or Malawi, or even Egypt, right? They're thinking, man, as that place is really living in the past, right? And they're never going to come to grips with the future. And it's just basically our our goal to extract as much wealth out of the African continent as we possibly can, because the people there, have no understanding of the value of, things like the bauxite that they have, so that we can produce aluminum for, I was going to say aluminium. I've been around too many Brits for so long, for for all of our goods. So it's become basically a place that is dead, eulogizing, and just meant for extraction, and that's it. And so what I really want to do is focus on this paragraph, where Hairston is speaking. This is an excerpt from her. It says, decolonizing the African native spirit was a hopeless, and my camera's in the way, or my little box, hopeless, futile fantasy. I wanted to imagine something else. In the minds of those folks writing these eulogies, the colonized enter science as refugees from their magical worlds, prisoners of superstition, hostages of the colonizers, slaves of the master narrative. So normally when you find somebody who's African descent in a sci-fi novel, is what you say, there's like some sort of shaman, some person who, whose magic is weak, or it's basically, it interprets a world that doesn't exist, and all the other characters look at it as some sort of like, token, that is, trying to show a great contrast to the overwhelming advanced science of the world. So it's just something that's kind of like maybe kitschy or something like that. And so, and you do see that to a certain degree. It's sort of just like this tokenism of, the magical black person. And I hate to say it so directly like that, but so many times, particularly in movies, you find like that suddenly in the movie will be the introduction of this magical African American, or just African person, who provides the guidance for the hero to make it through some antiquated task, that they don't understand, but they need a magical guide to get them through so that they can reach the real science or the real advancement that the magical person would never have. They simply are relegated to that timeline in the story, and that's it. I won't get too bogged down in that, but watch for that if you don't already. If you don't already see that in the movies or TV shows that you watch, is how are these characters being treated? And Hairston's saying, well, this is how they're usually treated. They're treated as refugees from their magical world, right? That's it. Prisoners of superstition, hostages of the colonizer, right? Slaves of the master narrative. That's how they're treated. But she's saying modernity and postmodernity, although products of colonialism, displace the colonized to the past, to the history, to people who once were whole and now have been shattered by their backwardness, their poor competitive adaptations, their lack of science and democracy, and their inept economics. Right. This is what happened. Right. Modernity and postmodernity have turned all of these groups who have been colonized by Euro-American dominance, right? The whole military, and you could say, if you want to use the military-industrial complex, right? This sort of like world police who's just gone through and racked the entire globe to create this ultra capitalist system and free everybody to live in liberal democracies, which is a benefit. There's no doubt about it. But the annihilation of cultures through that. And then she says, the colonizers have consumed the colonized and defined the future, right? That's what the idea here is. This is why I'm giving you these texts. So caught up in the past, still trying to survive history, how can the colonized imagine a future? How can a future be imagined that contains the remnants of their broken spirits? This is the kind of challenge I like as a writer, right? And so what she's saying is this is our science, right? The science of the colonized is fiction, which sounds frightening to say, but what she's, just like Oakfor, she's saying is that the science, the futurism written in these fictional novels, right? That's the world that we're looking for, right? That's what we're looking for. We're creating these narratives so that when they are read, those who read them can imagine a world that is not colonized, right? That is not shattered, right? That's not poor competitive adaptation, that doesn't lack science, that doesn't lack democracy. It's not inept, right? They're not hostages, they're not refugees. They are the ones transforming the world that they live in, right? And that is what I wanted you to get out of both Okafor's texts. I know that might be hard with Okafor's text. The TED Talk, though, that she gives in the blog. But this is why I'm having you read Hairston, is that she's pointing out that these texts are not just fiction. These are the way we tell the future, right? They provide us a future, right? That's why it's called futurism, not because it's something that doesn't exist. It's something that's possible, right? Something that could happen. And so it provides the hope, and it I would say sidesteps, circumvents the shattering of these groups who have been colonized. And says, we're going to bring ourselves back together through these narratives. I want you to see that, right? That's what Hairston's trying to do in this story. That's, what's so interesting and so crazy about it is that she drops this barrier, but by dropping the barrier, new political formations have to happen. And what she's saying is that these new political formations actually have an impact on science, on magic, and on religion. The only reason we see science, magic, and religion the way we do is because of how they have been politically formed and how we accept that political formation, those narratives that we live in every day on a regular basis, right? You can accept those, and sometimes we have to. They're forced on us, mainly for the most part by the idea that we might need a cure that we can't get somewhere else, and so we have to use dominant science to get it. We have to use it in some instances, when, like, if we want to participate in this society, we have to accept those cultural realities of particular forms of science. I mean, we're using computers right now, and the computers that we use were all formed through dominant forms of science, right? That doesn't mean that they cannot adapt or change, or simply reform, I should say, because of political changes, because of new worlds that that people decide to shape. And that is what I'm hoping to get you to think about in reading this Hairston text, right? So again, I hope you enjoyed it. And I noticed that in the comments that everyone pointed out that both texts, the connection between both texts was power, right? And that's why for week 3, you're reading the power. And because that's explicitly what Naomi Alderman's doing, is she's saying, well, what if there was like a real power shift, right? What if suddenly an entire group who has been deemed powerless compared to the dominant male is suddenly the powerful, right? What does that do? What does that mean? How do we see that? And so I hope that that text then provides you with a sort of a full circle thinking about how science, magic, religion are political formations, and they're worlds that we agree to participate in, that we are, and that we imagine for what they are, right? And so I will get more into that, I guess, next week. But I want you to think about that, is that it's a choice. You know, it's just like writing, the connection. These are choices. We're making these connections, or somebody's making them for us. And so that's really what we do as writers, is that we can create our own worlds. And if you want to have your world created for you, well, don't write. I know that sounds heavy, but if you want to create your own world, I hate to say it, write, right? And that, you might say, well, it's not necessarily, you don't have to write. Not everybody can write. That's true. That is so true. But there are many forms of what we might call writing, many ways in which we can communicate, many media, lots of modes, right? We have so many more than we normally do. And we see, even when we think about, and this will be the last point I make, and then I'll shut this down, but like, think about, and I don't want to always bring this message, but think about the fact that, the President of the United States, when you think about the way the president communicates, right, to a conventional, or I should say to like a what would be somebody like an educated, and I could say just conventional, but to like an educated political mind, he doesn't make any sense, right? There's no doubt about it. It doesn't match, right? His ability to articulate thoughts is at an extremely low level. His vocabulary shows nothing more than a high school education, or not even that. But he has shaped a world in which he is the leader, right? And he's done that through, and it's, you have to accept the fact, through calculated choices. The rallies that he holds are meant to provide a outlet for the people who support him, and to connect to those people in the ways that they want to be connected. He knows his audience, right? And even though he might crash and burn, when giving briefings about coronavirus, he still is able to craft the world around him through specific forms of messaging, right? Through looking at the information in the way that he knows it needs to be shaped to provide his power over those who he sees as providing him the power, right? He's still able to create a base. He's still able to speak to that base. and he's still able to get support despite the fact that you might think that he's great, but despite the fact that conventionally um, it makes no sense, right? And so this is what Hairston and a lot is speaking to. We have to be able to like challenge ourselves to shape our reality, and that is done through imagining it. And the way we imagine it is through creation, right? We can do it through text, we can do it through visual art, we can do it through performance art. But if we want to participate in the creation of our world, we have to create, right? We have to make something. We have to do it. We have to show up and be there, right? We have to handle that challenge. And I hate to say it, it's just a reality. It's a fact, right? Um, so that's it. I'll talk to you guys in some videos next week. And I hope this is going okay. Really let me know if it's not going okay, like if you want more from me. And you should have some appointments coming out to sign up for so we can talk about your sophomore year. Yeah, I hope everything's going okay. And let me know if it's not. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.